If your dashboard is suddenly lit up with that check engine light, you are definitely in the right place. I know, it's one of the most frustrating warnings a car can give you, but a lot of the time it's pointing to a very specific and totally fixable problem. Today, we're going to decode one of the most common codes out there.
So there it is, that little orange engine light staring you down. You plug in a code reader and it spits back this cryptic message, P0135. Now, I know that sounds like technical nonsense, but it's actually a super specific clue. Think of it like the start of a breadcrumb trail, and right now, we're going to follow it all the way to the source. Here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll crack the code itself to really understand what your car is trying to tell you. Then we'll line up the usual suspects, the parts that almost always cause this exact issue. After that, I'm going to walk you through a simple step-by-step diagnosis you can absolutely do yourself. And finally, we'll land on the most common fix. All right, let's dive in. Okay, first things first. What is your car's computer actually trying to say with this code? Remember, an error code isn't just some random alert. It's a very specific message, pointing to a very specific system that needs your attention. So, P0135, it directly translates to O2 sensor heater circuit malfunction, and it even tells us exactly which one, bank 1, sensor 1. Now, the most important words here are heater circuit. That's our big clue. It tells us the problem isn't with the sensor's main job of, sniffing exhaust fumes, but with the little electrical part inside that helps it warm up. Yeah, you can think of your O2 sensor as having two really important jobs. Its main gig is to measure the oxygen in your exhaust. It sends that info to the car's computer, which then fine-tunes the air-to-fuel mix for the best possible efficiency. But for it to do that job right, it needs to get really hot really fast. And that's where its second job comes in, a tiny built-in electric heater. So why is this little heater so important? Well, when you first start your car, especially when it's cold, the engine runs in what's called open loop. It's kind of like a default mode that's not very efficient. The heater's only job is to get that O2 sensor scorching hot. We're talking over 600 degrees Fahrenheit as fast as humanly possible. Once it's hot, the engine can switch over to its much smarter, much more efficient closed loop mode, which saves you gas. Okay, so where do you find this thing? Bank 1 is always the side of the engine that has the number 1 cylinder. If you have a simple 4-cylinder engine, hey, you've only got one bank, so that's easy. And sensor 1 just means it's the first sensor the exhaust fumes hit, so it's located before the catalytic converter. You'll also hear it called the upstream sensor. All right, so we know what the code means, and we know where the part is. Now, let's move on to the fun part of our investigation, lining up the usual suspects and figuring out what's causing that heater circuit to act up. Well, the numbers here tell a pretty clear story. A whopping 80% of the time, the P0135 code is pointing directly at a faulty O2 sensor. Simple as that. The internal heating element just gave up. The other, much less likely possibilities are some kind of wiring or fuse issue, and in super rare cases, a problem with the engine computer itself. But odds are, it's the sensor. And what are you actually going to notice when you're driving? Well, besides that check engine light, the symptoms can be pretty subtle. Because your engine is stuck in that less efficient open loop mode for longer, you'll probably see your gas mileage take a bit of a hit. You will almost certainly fail an emissions test, and you might notice the engine running just a little bit rough right after you start it up cold. Okay, now for the hands-on part. But don't worry, this is not nearly as complicated as it sounds. We're just going to follow a simple, logical process to prove exactly where the problem is. Let's do a little detective work. Our diagnostic plan has just 3 easy steps, and we're going to start with the easiest stuff first. A quick visual inspection of the wiring, then we'll check a fuse, and finally, if those 2 things look good, we'll do a simple electrical test on the sensor itself. First up, just use your eyes. Find that bank 1, sensor 1 O2 sensor, and take a really close look at its wiring. The exhaust area is a pretty brutal place. It's hot, it's dirty, so look for any obvious signs of damage. We're talking wires that look melted or frayed, or any of that nasty green corrosion building up on the pins inside the electrical connector. If all the wiring looks perfectly fine, your next stop is the fuse box. Your owner's manual is basically your treasure map here. Look in the index for a fuse labeled something like O2 heater or H/F heater. Pull that little guy out and see if it's blown. If it is, great, you might have just found your problem. But if you replace it and it blows again right away, that tells you there's a short circuit somewhere in the wiring you just looked at. So the wiring looks good, the fuse is fine, now it's time to test the sensor itself. Go ahead and unplug it and grab a multimeter set to measure resistance or ohms. On the sensor's plug, not the car's plug, touch your two probes to the two pins for the heater circuit. They're usually the same color, like two white wires. Now look at your reading. As you can see here, a healthy sensor should read somewhere between 2 and 30 ohms. If your meter says OL, which means open line, or it reads 0, you've just confirmed it. The heater inside that sensor is dead.
So after that little bit of detective work, I'm willing to bet you have found the culprit. Let's move on to the final and most satisfying step, the solution.
And here it is. 9 times out of 10, probably even more, once you've confirmed the wiring and fuse are okay, the fix for a P0135 code is simply replacing that Bank 1, Sensor 1 oxygen sensor. You've diagnosed the problem, you've isolated the bad part, and now you know exactly what needs to be done. Now, to get the job done, you'll obviously need the new sensor. You'll also need some basic hand tools. But I'll give you a pro tip. These sensors can be in some really tight spots. You might want to get a special O2 sensor socket. It has a slot cut down the side for the wire, and trust me, it can make the job a whole lot easier.
And that's it. That mysterious P0135 code is no longer a mystery. You've just learned how to decode the message, diagnose the system, and pinpoint the exact solution. You've replaced confusion with confidence. So the only question left is, what part of your car are you going to master next?